Let's check out today's conversation. Mike sits down with Regional Agency Director Keith Bennett. Keith shares his entire journey through life, from the tragedy he experienced in childhood.
When I was 12, my dad got sick. He fell, he just couldn't hardly walk. And then my mom, helped and got him into the house that night.
To becoming dependent on drugs.
I had swore I'd never touch drugs because of what it had done to my brother's life. Mm-hmm. Well, I had to have something.
This is how you're coping.
I dealt with it, yeah.
And the moment he was given a second chance to make things right in his life.
It gave me something that I'd lost when my dad got sick. It gave me hope.
All of this coming up next on the Level Up Lifestyle.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Level Up Lifestyle podcast. I'm your host, Mike Sheets, coming to you here from the Globe Life Studios in McKinney, Texas. We've got a great guest with us today. Man, Keith Bennett, you have an amazing story. Listen, fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be an impactful episode for a lot of people. And Keith, I'm just so happy that you're here.
Thanks, man. I'm excited. I'm really glad to be here. I'm a little overwhelmed.
Sure.
But yeah, you're right. I have a pretty powerful story, and I love the ability and the time that I get to put it out there.
Yeah. So let's set up who you are for the people that are listening. Maybe some people aren't familiar with you. So Keith, you are a regional agency director
yes, sir.
With Globe Life, Liberty National Division. You oversee a team of about how many people?
Oh my gosh, there's probably 45 to 50.
45, 50 people out in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Some people in leadership that you develop, that you work with. Last year, you were, where did you finish? As a
regional director, we finished number 3.
And as an agency director, you're number 1.
We were number 1, yeah.
Number 1.
Yeah.
And, internally, we have kind of a group of our managers, kind of middle manager leaders, people in RADs, agency directors. It's called the SEAL team.
Yeah.
And it stands for Systems Equipping Advanced Leadership. And the whole concept behind the SEAL team was to take the top of the top in our leadership core and bring them together twice a year. Kind of nice destination places, right? We go to Cabo. We went to Colorado. We just got back from Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, and it's a great experience just to get the top of the top together and sharing ideas, developing each other's leadership. You have to qualify every year,
right?
So how many years have you qualified for it?
Oh my gosh, 6.
6 years.
Yeah, all 6 years. I
6 years in a row. It's only been around for 6 years, and you've qualified every year.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Again, I'm going to say this word a lot today. It's really overwhelming. And I've been blessed with some really good folks. I brought some good folks into this industry, and they've grown with me. And it's just been a blessing. Yeah.
Well, Keith, you've qualified for the SEAL team every year for 6 years. You're the only person that's ever done that. Right, you're the last of the Mohicans there. You're having another great year, right? And everything's shaping up. So, just a ton of success in the business. You got a great lifestyle. You've got a great, home life, work life. You're giving back to the community. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind the Level Up Lifestyle podcast, as we've been saying this whole season, is to take people who are experiencing these great levels of success. And let's really just unpack that journey, because a lot of times we see people when they're successful right now, but we don't see who they were 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of these experiences made them into the person they are. And maybe there's somebody listening to this or watching that can say, hey, I maybe was in that place that Keith was in, or I maybe had an experience, and they can pull from your strength and how you've overcome and see where you are today, and it can kind of help tell their story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, I love sharing my story. It's tough sometimes.
Right.
I've mentioned that about 11 years ago, I become a big crybaby. So, but it's just the passion that I have, and the passion that that I've been given, and for. Just for life, not just for the industry and for what I do and helping folks, but just for the passion I have for life now.
Well, let's get into it.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Let's get started. So, born and raised where?
Judsonia, Arkansas.
The booming metropolis. How many people in that town?
Oh my gosh, about 1,200.
Okay.
I think. Yeah. I graduated with about 29 folks in my class. I think. Yeah. I took people. I think I was in the top 3 of my class, but there wasn't. But very few to pick from.
Yeah. Maybe 10.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Very few to pick from.
So what did your family do as a kid growing up? What was that like?
Yeah, so my dad worked for the power company, which at that time was APNL, Arkansas Power and Light. It later became Entergy, but that's where my dad worked. I remember my mom didn't work for a long time, but then she started working for a factory for a little while until my dad got sick, and that was I remember when I was 7, 8, 9, 10. I remember we went to church, quite frequently. I remember we stopped. I don't know why. I've never really asked. I just remember there was a point at which where we didn't go to church. It was a real small church, not far from our house. It used to be an old honky tonk.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, years ago, and back when my dad was
sound
young.
system.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it did. And I just remember we stopped going to church. And then, of course, when I was 12, my dad got sick.
Okay. And what happened with your dad?
Yeah, he got a disease. Actually, he had a stomach virus, and he got a disease that's called Guillain-Barré syndrome, and it follows a virus, and he had been sick for a couple of days with stomach virus, and he went back to work, and his...
Just kind of like a normal, sick to my stomach.
Yeah, just sick to his stomach. Yeah, just whatever. Just
had some bad hibachi or something.
Yeah, exactly,
right?
Yeah. And then he, but then that evening after he came home from work, he got out of his bucket truck and he fell. He couldn't hardly walk. Mm-hmm. And so my mom came and got him and walked him into the house, and that was on a Friday. And actually, remember back a little bit, he went to the doctor earlier that day, and the doctor told him he was hyperventilating and gave him a bag to breathe in. Well, he got home then and went to feed his dogs, and he had bird dogs. My dad raised high caliber, quail dogs and stuff, pointers and retrievers, or pointers and setters and stuff. And but anyway, he fell. He just couldn't hardly walk. And then my mom, helped and got him into the house that night. Yeah, that night I remember it really well. I was 12. It was 1982. And my brother and I, we were sleeping on the floor on a pallet. When you're a kid, the floor is more comfortable than a bed for some reason in the living room. And I remember
the TV's in there.
Yeah, the TV's in there. Yeah, it's the only place who had a TV back then. And I heard something kind of hit the floor, and then I heard something just bellowing. It sounded like if you ever heard a calf beller, that's what it sounded like a calf bellowing. And we ran into my mom and dad's bedroom. And my dad was laying there on his side and was trying to move, and he couldn't move.
Wow.
Yeah, it went from normally that disease takes the form of a creeping paralysis, and it takes over a few days. It slowly paralyzes your nervous system. Well, this attacked him and just overcome him just in a few hours. And what had happened, he had tried to roll over in the bed and couldn't really move, so he just really flopped and rolled over and rolled out of the bed and hit his head, and actually hit his ear. Had a big swelled up thing on his ear, but. We ran in there, and of course me and my brother, we couldn't hardly move. And my mom jumps up, and we call my grandpa and grandma. They live right up the road from us, about a quarter mile, and they came down, and between all of us, we got him in the car. Let's go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Well, my dad looked at me. Just a second.
Take your time.
And he said, he couldn't hardly talk. He could just barely talk. And he said, "Son, I'm afraid this is the last time I'm going to see you."
Wow.
So anyway, they got him to the hospital. And within an hour and a half, he was completely out. They thought he was in a coma. Mm-hmm. He wasn't in a coma. He could hear, and if you've ever had a dream to where you can't move,
sleep paralysis.
Yes, that's what he was.
Oh my gosh.
He was in the ICU for 3 months. He was in the hospital,
fully aware of everything that's happening. And can't move. That's
right, and we didn't know.
So you find this out later when he's like, "Hey, you guys were deciding who gets the dogs and, who's doing this.
Right. Yeah. And, the thing is, we spent, the doctor spent a long time just basically trying to figure out what was wrong with him. They didn't know, what the disease was. They didn't know what had happened. But I had a little, had this little tree stand built and had this little bow. And I remember sitting up in that thing just all that day waiting, to hear back from the hospital and just, praying for my dad. And then my aunt came to my house and picked me up and took me to be with my, hang out with my cousins and stuff and all that. But my dad was in the hospital he couldn't move anything at all. The first thing he could move, he could just barely move his thumb like this, just barely move it. And then he slowly got over,
so he's
back.
Recovering.
Yeah, slowly. Yeah, slowly but surely just getting recovery.
This is something that people don't always recover from, though.
Right? Yeah. Well, at the time, and I think even still to this date, as far as I know, he had it worse than anybody had ever had it and still recovered from it, because it actually was trying to attack his heart muscles. There was one night where his heart stopped beating 3 times and they had to bring him back with paddles and stuff. And
you're 12 years old while this is all going on, right? So that's just got to be... a completely overwhelming thing, and you get your mom at home taking care of you, grandparents down the road. So I'm sure it's a family thing. So you're distracting yourself with the tree stand and, just kind of doing kid stuff, I guess.
Yeah, just doing kid stuff. I had played baseball before that, but then once he had gotten sick, I didn't play baseball anymore. But we actually had a room at the hospital that was our room so our family stayed in a lot. My mom stayed over there constantly. My mom was 32, and whenever this happened to my dad, he was 40 when it happened. But I was just things were different. Yeah. It was a small town, so everybody knew my dad. They had Jake Bennett Day one day at Judsonia there. It was really cool. But again, he's in the hospital for 11 days short of a year. And then once he gets out of the hospital, his hands are crippled up. He still can't control anything hardly at all. We have to, for the next probably 3.5 to 4 years, me and my, I had 2 other brothers. One his name was Paul Wayne. He was 6 years older. I say Paul Wayne real quick, but he's Paul Wayne. Yeah. 6 years older.
You said it fast. They said it fast in the house. One word in the house, right?
Yeah. It was one word. And my next older brother's name was Damon. He was 1.5 years older. And then I had a younger sister. And my oldest brother was already starting to work and stuff, so he wasn't around a lot. But me and my next older brother, my sister, we had to wipe my dad and feed him and bathe him. And, that's how I spent my 10 years.
Yeah, I was saying you're in high school when this is going on.
Yeah.
That's got to stick with you.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, it did. I had, which I was a real small, skinny kid. I wasn't real strong. And I had a couple of friends that were pretty good size, and they spent the night with me a lot to help me. My dad helped pick him up off the potty chair, put him on the bicycle. Because here's the thing about my dad. Is that once he got out of the hospital and once he saw some results that he was slowly getting better, he worked his butt off every day. It was work for him just to get up out of bed and us to get him dressed. And then he would go out. We had some parallel bars that he would get and walk in those parallel bars. We'd have to go stand him up and he'd walk back and forth. And he would sit down and his hands were drawn up like this. And he would sit there and he'd look at his hands, because he worked with his hands. Yeah. And he would look at his hands. And then he'd get himself stood back up and walk again back and forth. He just wouldn't quit.
Yeah, that's got to be so formative for you though, as a teenager. You're growing up and you're seeing this and that work ethic to get better. And that do you feel like maybe sometimes you're pulling from that strength later on in life? Now all the success that you've had in business and things like that. Are you pulling some of that work ethic from seeing that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would sit there in the door and because I'd watch him, because I'd wheel him out there and then we'll go back out and say, Dad, you ready to go in and eat some dinner? And he'd say, well, let me go one more round. Yeah. One more trip, you know. But yeah, I pull a lot from that because I watch that every day and there was no quit in my dad. And, I tell myself all the time, and I've told folks in the past, that how can I dishonor my dad's memory? Because my dad just died in December of this past year.
Sorry to hear
How
that.
Could I? Yeah, thanks. He lived a long life, battled a long life with that disease, and then cancer finally took him out in December of 2022. But I tell folks, how can I, having 100% of my health, not get up every day and give my best when I watch my dad do it with 20% health, 30% health, Yeah. So I pull from that daily. Yeah.
That's so huge. So going back to high school, right? a little different in the Bennett house, obviously, and how you're supporting, your family and the things that you're doing. And then as you're coming out of school and you're branching out on are you going to college, or do you have a career in mind? Are you thinking, because your dad worked for the power company, are you going to do something like that, or what's going through Keith Bennett's head at this point?
Well, I never really thought about what I was going to do. I don't know why. I remember my guidance counselor asked me as I was getting ready to graduate, and I had a Ford four-wheel drive truck that I was rebuilding the engine in. Okay. I was using the money I was getting for, you always get when you graduate to rebuild my engine. He goes, Keith, you and I need to talk. And but I'll go back a little bit. Whenever I was, so my dad got sick when I was 12, and then whenever I was 13, I started working at an after-school program because I liked working. Because we didn't have anything. We had government cheese. My dad made really good money for the power company.
But you're probably disability at this point. Government subsidies and all that.
Yeah. We didn't have anything then. But I wanted more. So I worked, and actually when I was 14, all one summer I spent working at the school on a program, and I remember my first paycheck, I went and bought a new compound bow, and that was, of course, and just gave me my passion for bow hunting and bow shooting. I shot archery tournaments later.
It's got to mean so much, though, when you're a kid, you're 14 and you work to get that, right? I mean, that's a prized possession.
$3.35 an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I cherished that bow. It was phenomenal that I could get that. It wasn't a good bow, but it was still as good as I could afford. And
kind of your first, feel like you accomplished something in some maybe adverse
absolutely. And then when I was 15, I actually lied on a job application so I could start working because I had to be 16 to work, and I put my birth date a year earlier than what it actually was, and started working at a store not far from my school, and I worked there 5 days a week all through school.
Wow.
So, got out of college, registered 2 different times for college, and the first time I registered, I was really intent on going, but I started working in construction, and I liked it. I liked working with my hands. I liked accomplishing stuff, and the guy I worked with was a hard worker, which was really cool because I wanted to work really hard and made money. So I decided not to go to college that year. The next year I got married, and I got out of school in 87. I got married in 88, and I registered for college again, but I decided I wanted to continue working in construction, so I continued in construction. And then I had a daughter in 89, had a little girl. I wasn't ready for a kid yet, but we had a little girl, and beautiful. Her name's Cassidy. And then in 1992, I started my own construction business.
Okay.
Yeah, I started that. Yeah, did really well.
So just kind of took off with the construction and enjoyed it, and the business was booming.
Yeah, did really good. Yeah, I had a business partner that just had incredible work ethic. He didn't know anything about what we did, but I taught him really quick. So we went into business together and did really good for a long time. I shot a lot of archery tournaments. I traveled all over the United States shooting archery tournaments as a professional. I really loved that.
Really? So
really
did
cool.
The business was doing so well that you could kind of almost be a little bit more hands off?
Yeah.
And it was running its own self, and you got to.
Right. Yeah. Especially during the winter, during bow season, because my partner and I, we hunted a lot, and we had a few crews work for us that did really well.
Yeah. What type of construction was it?
Actually, siding. We did siding, soffit and fascia. We did a lot of commercial stuff and a lot of residential stuff. But that was like there used to be an old company years ago called Hankey Brothers, and that was what I always said was my biggest competition. They had TV commercials and everything, on that. But we did construction did really well. In 98, I built a big, I say big, and a really good, nice 2-story house and stuff. Doing really well with that, and. Again, continuing to shoot. My partner and I did a lot of bow hunting on video and stuff.
So you were like on TV. You were an internet celebrity as the internet was being developed, right?
I don't know that I was a celebrity, but we were on there. We were on 3 or 4 different hunting shows that we had videos, because he was he had the great equipment and stuff, and he was a freelance videographer. So I was always the subject that always got filmed, and we actually had a show in Arkansas. It's called Real Hunting Arkansas, REEL Hunting Arkansas, and the first year we had to have 26 shows, and he and I had like 20 of the 26 shows was the stuff that we had made, and another couple of guys had started the company or the show, and then we were we became more of not just the guest, but we were the staple. You know, because it was all of our hunting stuff on there. Yeah.
So everything's going really well for you at this point, right? You just built your, I guess, dream house. You've got married, couple kids. Business is booming. You're on TV, you know, doing what you love. So, you know, where does the story go from here? Because that's a transition from things are going well to now you come into the insurance business.
Right. Yeah. So I had my second daughter in 96, built the house in 98, did really well. And then in 2003, December of 2003, about 4:30 in the afternoon, I get a call from my mom. And she said, Keith, Pauline is in the ambulance going to the hospital, but he's dead.
Oh, wow.
I said, okay, Mom, I'll be there. So I got to the hospital. I went in the emergency room where he was at. They had a thing in his mouth where they'd been trying to breathe for him, and he was dead. You know, he had stuff all over his face.
What happened?
He died of renal failure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, died of renal failure at home. My next older brother, Damon, was there with him.
Did we know he was sick?
No, he wasn't sick at all. He just all of a sudden. Yeah. Well, let me back up a little bit. In 96, he had a crash, a car wreck. Both of my brothers were pipeliners.
Okay.
They pipelined, and they had a crash. And or he had a crash and was paralyzed from the waist down. So my mom's at home with my dad in a wheelchair still, my oldest brother in a wheelchair. Taking care of both of those. And my mom, funny thing, my mom and dad had went with my aunt and uncle to Tunica that day to do some gambling. You know, my dad loved to pull those
Wheel
handles.
Me up to the slots here, right?
Yeah, he loved
This is physical therapy, right? You know, I'm moving my arms.
It was. And that's where they were. And whenever they got home, or on their way home, Damon called, and then they got there, and an ambulance was there. But anyway, I go in the emergency room. My dad's, my brother's there, and he's, he's dead. And it was difficult. You know, I remember going to my mom's house and mom and dad's house that night. And my next older brother was there, and he had some issues. So I kind of going to go back just a little bit. Without any parental supervision, you know, at the house whenever we were going up after Dad got sick, my brothers got really bad on drugs and alcohol. They went really bad off the deep end. They did a little bit of everything and anything.
Because you guys are kind of just left on your own a little bit. Your mom's taking care of your dad.
Exactly.
And, you know, we got to make this work, and you guys are fending for yourselves. Yeah,
exactly. My oldest brother took care of us whenever he was there, and if he wasn't there, it was just us. You know? But they got really bad on drugs and stuff. And so I'm at my mom and dad's house that night. My next older brother, he had gotten I don't know what he got in a hotel, but some kind of really bad drug that had messed him up mentally. He actually had multiple personality disorder from that drug. Yeah, it was terrible. He had so many different people that he was, but he had applied for mental what's it called?
Help?
Well, yeah, but from the government, you know, disability.
Yeah.
He had applied for mental disability. And so while I was standing there, he was there with Paul Wayne whenever Paul Wayne had died, and and he was telling me what all had happened. And he pulls this check out of his pocket. And he said, don't get me wrong, my brothers worked really hard. You know, they were really hard workers because they saw my dad. And he pulls this check out of his pocket, and he said, I just got this check from the government for my disability. If I cash it, I can never work again. You know? And I said, well, Damon, you got to do what you got to do. You know, if you can't work, then you need to do it. And so anyway, I go home, and I'm in bed about 4:30. The next morning, my mama calls, and she said, Keith, Damon's dead. And I'm just like,
the next day,
the next morning, 12 hours later.
Wow.
I was just floored. I'm like, what? And she said, Damon's dead. I said, okay, I'll be right there. So oddly enough, I walked into my bathroom, and I turned on the shower, and I get in the shower. And while I'm taking a shower, it just all of a sudden it starts hitting me.
You just didn't know what to do, so I was
in shock.
I'll take a shower before I go.
I was kind of in shock, and as I'm taking a shower, it hits me what she said, and I'm like, oh my gosh! So I flew out of the shower, I threw on some clothes, and told my wife, Mom just called and said that Damon is dead. She goes, what? And so anyway. So I jumped in my truck and I drive to my mom and dad's house. It's about 25 minutes away, and walked in, and my dad's sitting at the table, and my mom's there on the couch or on the chair just with her head down, just bawling. And the medical examiner and stuff was there, and the police, because, 2 grown men had died 12 hours apart in the same house. And so they were
what's going on?
Examining it. And, my sister came in, and it was just... Anyway, they didn't let us go. We didn't get to go and see him for a little while, probably about an hour. And then we finally got to go in. And by that time, not to get graphic, but, blood had kind of pulled, and his skin was kind of turning black. And I just kind of freaked out and said, oh my gosh, he's turning black.
It's not a good sight.
Not a good way to see your brother. And but I cried harder that day than I've probably ever cried in my life.
I can imagine. What happened to your second brother?
He overdosed. Yeah, he overdosed that night. He just couldn't deal with everything that happened.
Grief of losing.
Yeah. The grief of losing, and then having, given up his manhood, he thought, by getting that disability check.
Wow.
So that.
And we didn't talk about, so like growing up though, while your mom's taking care of your dad, it's the 3 brothers and are you guys close as siblings then?
Yeah, we were fairly close. We slowly, you would think that it would have brought us closer together, all that happening, but it really didn't. That's like my sister and I. She's 2 years younger than I am. And with everything that we've been through, you would think it would really have brought us really close together. And don't get me wrong, we love each other to death, but it's just, when we're around each other, the pain.
Yeah. Reminds you of.
Yeah.
And I think everybody processes these types of things differently, right? So.
Yeah, just the pain of it kind of reminds us. So that after that happened, that affected me a lot more mentally than I thought it, I thought. Yeah. So it affected everything I did. I actually started doing a lot of drinking. Started doing drugs. I had swore I'd never touch drugs because of what it had done to my brother's life. Mm-hmm. Well, I started, I had to have something.
This is how you're coping.
I dealt with it. Yeah.
That's kind of that's self-medication, right? Trying to deal with the things that have happened.
Exactly. Yeah. Just trying to figure out some way to ease the pain and to, and I started hanging out with a different group of folks then, people that partied, and my wife and I actually, we partied with them for a little while. And then that was in 2003 and 2004. And then in 2005, I left my wife and kids. I got divorced and left my wife and kids.
So now, you're dealing with obviously the challenges of losing. I think on top of that, everything that happened with your dad, you had a business, you had, you kind of had the house and the white picket fence, and you go in a different direction. And, this phase of your life is, it's, things are different for you, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Absolutely. I, like I said, I left my wife and kids. I ended up with my business partner. I stepped away from the part of the business that I was doing with him in 2007 and kind of left him all that. And I was doing construction still, just different jobs, odd jobs and different things. And, here's the thing. I didn't see the drugs having that much of an effect on me.
You felt like you were still.
I felt like I was functioning. Everything was fine, but I really wasn't. Now I'm looking back on it now. Matter of fact, there's a period from 2006 to 2009. It's just a blur. I really can't even remember hardly a whole lot of went on during that time. I can see pictures. I'm like, man, I can't remember that.
You don't even recognize the person in the picture.
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. And then in 2010, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer, and she died October 15th of 2010. And with that, what that brought along is, with all the stuff, like I said, went to church when I was a kid, but with all that stuff that went on with my family, I tried not to believe in God, and I hated God for the things that happened. And then when my mom died, when my dad got sick, she was 32, and she had taken care of my dad and my brothers all the way up until, they were both gone.
She's the glue holding everything together.
Absolutely, yeah. She was great. My kids loved her to death. Matter of fact, anytime my oldest daughter would get in trouble, she would go upstairs and call her Mimi to come pick her up. And I'd look out the window and my mom would be pulling up in the driveway to pick her up. I'm like, what are y'all doing? She's in trouble. But anyway, she passed away in October 2010, and that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with me on my alcohol and drugs. I had a pure hatred for God when I did believe. And like I said, I tried not to believe. I thought I was too intelligent to believe in God. And I went really off the deep end and ended up losing everything I had. I went bankrupt, had a house that I was barely hanging on to. And just financially, I remember the Christmas right after that, I didn't even have money to buy my kids Christmas presents. I take it back. I went to Old Navy and I bought this little jacket, and I got a free fleece rug blanket that came with it, and I gave one of them the jacket and the other one the blanket. Just that's so. I'm so ashamed of that, because I provided really well, and then I just let my hatred for God and my drugs and alcohol just control me, And the thing is, I was doing all that with drugs and alcohol. I didn't think anybody knew, I know people.
You thought you were able to live this life and no one picked up on it, but I'm sure people saw it.
Yeah, I would do like cocaine, meth during the day. And then at night I would take Xanax so I could sleep, and that's how I justified it. That's how I justified it, because I wasn't staying up all night, and I was going to bed and I was sleeping. I would drink, of course, constantly through all that. And but then in May of 2012, got up one morning, and it was a Thursday morning. Let me back up. 2 nights before, on Tuesday night, I went to bed with my gun at my head.
Oh my goodness!
With it cocked.
Wow.
Hoping it would go off. I don't remember the next day, Wednesday. I have no recollection of it at all. I know I measured jobs. I did something. I really can't remember. But then Thursday morning, I woke up. I got out of bed, and I walked into my bathroom. I had a couple jobs I had to go measure. I was out of dope. I was out of beer. And my plans were to go hunt all that down after I measured the jobs, And I walk into my bathroom, and I reach to my right, and I turn on my shower. And when I turn on my shower, I just turned and looked in the mirror to my left. And at that moment, God decided to let me see who I was, what I was, what I'd become. I can't explain what I saw. I just knew it was horrible. And instead of hating God, I hated the person I was looking at. I spent that entire day in my bathroom just screaming. I was so mad. I was cussing. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what conviction was. I just knew something was wrong.
You finally didn't recognize yourself.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, not at all. I screamed, I cussed, I cried. It was miserable. My phone normally would have rang 50 times that day, and it never even went off. It was really strange, eerie. And I usually, when I share my story, I usually kind of stop it right there. But I want to share exactly how it went. So that full day on a Thursday, I fought it all day long. Fought it. Finally, I got so mad that I forced it away, and I walked out of my bathroom and laid down, went to bed. I slept really good. I don't know how, but I slept really good. The next morning, Friday morning, I get up, I walk into my bathroom again, turn on my shower, and there is no way in the world I'm going to look in that mirror. Yeah. There was nothing that you were going to be able to do to make me look in that mirror. And I'm sitting here like this with my hand in the water, waiting, and it's cold. And it's cold. It won't warm up. And I just happened to peek over my shoulder in the mirror. It hit me again.
Same thing.
I hit my knees. I cried. I screamed. I begged. I finally got up. I wiped my face off, dried up, and I looked in the mirror. I said, okay, God, you're real. This is real. I don't know what to do. Please help me. I begged him to help me. And see, just a couple weeks before that, I went to church with my daughter on a Sunday, because she was always every other Sunday. She was like, Dad, you're going to church. Dad, you're going to church. Normally I was hungover, still spun out, whatever. Yeah. I was still, and I wouldn't go, but I went this one particular Sunday. And when we got to the invitation song, it felt like my heart was ripping out of my chest. You know, I hated it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't get out of there fast enough, you know? And then again, just a couple weeks later, I had those road to Damascus experience in my bathroom. And then that Friday after, again, I said, okay, God, you're real. Please help me. You know, I instantly knew that day, that moment, not even that day, that moment, I instantly knew I had to go to church, see my daughter's pastor. I went to church on Sunday, saw my daughter's pastor. He said, hey, Keith, it's good to see you here. I'm going to come and see you this week. And I said, fantastic. I need to talk to you. A few days later, he comes to my house, May 19th, 2012, and he walked me through salvation. It changed my life. It made the sky bluer, made the grass greener. It gave me something that I'd lost when my dad got sick. It gave me hope. It changed me inside out. It didn't change my circumstances.
This has been decades where you had just kind of maybe been masking that and then covering it up with
running,
you know, addiction. And it kind of seems like this just all of a sudden, like you maybe weren't seeking this part of your life. You know, you had that moment a few days prior, you know, even to your shower experience. And then and then all of a sudden here you are. So
yeah, I wasn't looking for it all. If anything, I was running from it and hiding from it and you know, trying to put on the persona that I hated it, you know, but yeah, it changed everything about me. Again, it gave me that hope. You know, I had spent so many years searching for that one thing that was going to fill that hole in my heart. You know, every drug, every drink, every woman, whatever. Everything that you know, that's what I was trying to do. I had this hole I was trying to fill, and he instantly filled that hole. Filled it and sealed it, and it made me whole. And again, it didn't change my circumstances. You know, I'm still broke.
Yeah, right.
It just gave me a whole new reason, because I'd always had this really strong work ethic and I always loved working, but it gave me a whole new reason for working. It gave me a passion for, instead of working for me and my selfish reasons, I was working for him, you know? And so again, just kind of get back to your question, how did I transition into insurance? It was about a year later.
So once this happens in your life, I mean, this is like 5 days.
Oh yeah.
You know, and you've completely changed your life and your outlook. I mean, did you go to, like, did you check yourself into rehab, or did you just, I mean, did everything just cold turkey, dropped it right there?
Just dropped it.
Really?
Yeah, just dropped it. It was gone. He took it. He took it away. What I had relied on, which was the drugs and alcohol, to get me through my days and my nights, what I'd relied on for several years, he took it all away that day. And it was him. All about the Lord. I relied on him, you know, 100%. It just again, you know, I do a lot of work with some folks, like with John 3:16 in Arkansas, and also a place called Life and Victory, and with men that are dealing with addiction. And you know, there's a lot of people need that, you know, and for whatever reason, I didn't have to need it. You know, I didn't have to have it. He gave me all that I needed right then.
Yeah.
You know?
And I know a lot of people, you know, maybe listening to this, you know, of course, everyone has different, you know, beliefs and faiths, and you know, I don't want to go necessarily down that road, but it seems like for you, this is, you know, this was a crutch, that was just taken away, and away you go. So you said about a year later, you get into insurance.
Yep. Yeah. So it was a really cool story with that too. I actually I want to add this too, is that, you know, right after my salvation, God put someone in my life, because as a new Christian, you know, the enemy hates a new Christian, and he's going to do everything he can to, you know, to turn me back or whatever. And but God put this beautiful blonde-haired woman, Christian woman, in my life, and her godly influence on me kept me, you know, kept my faith and kept me from losing, you know.
So she kept you grounded.
She kept me grounded.
Kept you from, do you think you maybe would have went back to that life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think so. I think without her in my life, I would have, because there were just too many things that happened. The enemy tried too hard. There's just too many things that went on. You know, I didn't realize that day in my bathroom, or that day when Brother James walked me through salvation, the plan God had for me that's working out now, playing out even today, especially today. But also the enemy had a plan, and he tried his best. But had it not been for my wife, or she wasn't my wife at the time, but we started dating just a couple weeks. Matter of fact, the day that Brother James walked me through salvation, May 19, 2012, we went out on our first date that night.
Wow.
That night, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and we dated, and we got married a week after I started with Liberty. She thought she was marrying a construction worker.
Come to find out, it's an insurance agent.
Yeah, insurance guy. So I like to joke around with her and tell her, if you need me to, I'll put my tool belt on for a little while, whatever you need, honey. But yeah, he put her in my life, and she kept me grounded. But a year after my salvation, I'm still struggling financially. I'm doing everything I can. I'm working with a different reason. I was doing this one particular job, and I remember there's some ladies out there. It's an old folks home, and these ladies out there were calling me Mr. Smiley because I was smiling everywhere. I'm like, I have to. And but anyway, I finished up this job for this builder, and he gave me a check, and this was on a Wednesday. He said, "Hey, I need you to hang on to this check until Monday. I've got to go to the bank and get a draw Friday. The funds will be available Monday." And I said, okay. So I had too much pride to tell him I didn't have any money. So I go home, and I've got a check in my pocket. I've got money, but I don't have any money. And I get up the next morning, I walk into my kitchen, I open up my cabinet, and I got 2 pieces of bread and enough peanut butter and jelly to make one sandwich.
Wow.
Yeah. True story. 10 years ago, my youngest daughter was coming over that weekend, and I didn't have food to feed my kid. So I did a couple things in my bathroom that morning. The first thing is I prayed. I said, God, you have given me an incredible testimony. And no matter how bad it hurts, I'm going to share it with anybody and everybody that I get in contact with. And I know you have another door. And when you open that door, please slap me that I know to go through it. And I'm going to give you all the praise and glory. And then I made some phone calls, and I went and built a deck because there's no way I was going to let my daughter come to my house and not be able to feed her.
Go do the work and get paid. And,
yes, I got paid cash. There was no way I could have my kid come over and not be able to feed her. And then just a couple weeks after that, Jacob Haar, good friend of mine, he used to work for me in my construction business for several years. And he was working for Liberty, and he came to my house, and he said, "Hey, are you looking for anything different to do?" And I was like, "Man, I don't know what else I would do. All I've ever done is construction." I said, "But I got a guy working for me that's doing a lot of stuff, and the temptation is really bad, and I'm getting married." Mm-hmm. and I'm open. What is? He goes, "Well, I think you'd be good at what we do. I want you to come down and meet Jason Everett." I said, "Yeah, sure." So I dressed up the next Monday in my finest work clothes. I didn't have a suit back then, and I walked into Jason Everett's office. And when I did, he slid this book across his desk, and he said, "Hey, have you ever heard of Jonathan Edwards?" And I said, "Yeah. As a matter of fact, last week my pastor had mentioned him in a sermon, and I had studied it. And I was really intrigued by it. I'd studied it quite a bit." So that's all that was said about that. We didn't talk about the book or anything. We didn't go over what we do, or what the business entails or anything. We just talked about life. I shared my testimony with Jason. I shared things with him I'd never shared with anybody before because he was just, he's just so trustworthy, and I was just connected to him really quick. So anyway, we get done. We visit for about an hour, and he says, "Well, what we'd have to do first is get you licensed." And I said, "Well, let me go home and think about it," and he didn't close me. He let me walk out the door. So I walk out the door, I get my truck. I'm driving back to Searcy. And as I'm driving back, about halfway home, I know the exact spot that it hit me that I've been spoken to with that Jonathan Edwards book. And I told you about the day I prayed in my kitchen. Yeah. And I'd spoken to with that Jonathan. So I called Jason. I grabbed my phone. I called him. I'm shaking all my hair. I had more hair than even standing up on the top of my head. And I called him. I actually did have better hair years ago. Yeah. But I called him and I said, "Man, if you can get me that license class, I'll get started." He goes, "Let me call you right back." So I hang my phone up. Good Lord, longest 2 minutes of my life.
A little bit of a takeaway, maybe.
Yeah, longest 2 minutes of my life. He calls me back. He says, "Okay, be there tomorrow at 8:00 in the morning," because we did classroom courses then, not online.
Oh, in person.
Yeah,
for your license.
In person. Yes. So I said, "Well, I've never been late." He said, "Don't be late because they lock the door at 8:01. I said, "I've never been late. I'm not going to start now." So I drop everything I got to do with construction that day. I go home, I had a couple loose ends, I tied them up, and I got in that licensing class. And I got in a license class, I did the course, but I wasn't able to test for a month because of my bankruptcy. And that was I was so uncertain. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to get to test or what.
Like you couldn't schedule the test?
Couldn't schedule it. They wouldn't let me schedule. I wasn't eligible to test yet. They had to review my background and my bankruptcy. And in the meantime, I had a really good friend of mine at church that had some flooring work he needed done. So I did that job for him, and he paid me really well for doing it. And then I got a call, or I got my email saying you can schedule your exams. I went and took my exams. I passed the test that day. I ran to Jason's office, got in the system, and started working. A month later, it was a little different then. A month later, he made me a supervising agent. And then a year later, become an agency director.
Wow.
Yeah. It was kind of a really, just really quick start.
And it's a quick turnaround in your life, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So when you start as an agent, is it easy? I'm sure you're struggling like a lot of people do in the beginning.
Yeah, I struggled in the very beginning. I struggled because, we weren't on systems. Systems were just slowly beginning then. I wasn't on system at all. I was just, but the guy that was training me, he would go in and sit down and talk to a business owner for 30 minutes. He could just talk and have this big, long conversation. I'm not a good conversationist, I'm too ADD.
You're used to working with your hands and you're not talking to people.
Right.
You're just working. Yeah.
Yeah. So so I was kind of having doubts that I could do this. And then Jason took me out one day. This is my third day in the field, 2 days with Jake, 1 day with Jason. And we go into a business. We walked in about 10, but we walked in this one business and he's got a brochure. And he said, this is what we do and this is how we do it. We just ask you this. And the guy said, yeah, sure. And we go back, we meet with the payroll lady, we get the employee list, we walk out, and Jason hands me that paperwork, and I said, I can do that. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I can't do what I've been doing. I said, but I can do what you just did, I promise you. He said, what I do different? I said, you didn't make this big, long conversation that I can't do. And so, then he said, well, take this, and of course gave me the brochure, and he said, learn these 6 bullet points and go close a case. Next day, I took out on my own and started closing cases and did, in my first 6 months, over 30 cases.
Wow.
Depends on who you ask. Some people say 50, but it wasn't, but yeah, it was over 30 cases.
The legend, right?
Yes, yeah. I did. But then after being here 7th month, I made convention. I started in May 31st. And of course I got married the week later. But, my first year, I made convention and was on Leaders Club, which is really cool because you get like $100 gift certificate, for that, or a credit card with $100 on it. That was really, really cool. And then in my 7th month, one of my big businesses that I had closed went bankrupt. And oh my gosh, that was terrible. Because back then you had to repay the money, before you started getting paid again.
Yeah.
And that was a tough time for about a month. I struggled.
Are you thinking at this time, I don't know if this is for me, or where do I go, or what's going through your head? At
that point, no, I wasn't thinking that at all. I was just thinking, man, I got to work harder. I got to get through this, because they showed me on paper how I could outride it, basically, They showed me how I could do that. I just didn't get started soon enough. And finally, in February, I wrote about probably $15,000 1 week, and I got like a $1,500 check. But I was back in the positive, so I was ready to go, and did really good. And then I become a director in 2014. Is that right? Yeah. In August of 2014, I become a director. Not on systems, which was a mistake, because I've got this personality that I can close with, and I'm hiring people and I'm bringing people in. And man, I have such a passion for people.
Sure.
In this business, because here, I would tell them, all I do is talk to people, and I'm making this kind of money, and it's phenomenal. And I've had death claims and I've had accident claims. It's just been phenomenal of how I've been able to help folks. But as a director, I'm hiring people, and I'm not making them any promises. I'm just telling them, hey, if you'll do what I do, you can do this. Well, they couldn't do what I did, because I wasn't on system. I wasn't doing, the PAC calls is one of the first things I had to start doing, but I wasn't doing that. I wasn't, on scripts. I was just walking in and talking to people, and I just couldn't train anybody how to do that. And I was losing these folks. And finally, in March of 2015, I was at the point, I was like, man, because it was really hurting my heart when I'd hire someone and come in and I would lose them. And I said, I'm going to, I may just have to get back in construction, because I just can't hardly deal with this. It's really bugging me. But Jason again, because I was off system, but Jason told me, he said, I need you to come and meet with me. We're going to sit down and we're going to get you on systems. We got scripts that you're not using and I want you to start using them. And I said, okay. So the next day I was supposed to meet him after lunch. And so that day, right down the road from our office was a David's Burgers, and I love David's Burgers. I love a big cheeseburger. I'm a cheeseburger connoisseur. But anyway, I went to eat lunch, and there's a kid that worked in there. He's 19 years old. His name was Jose Romero. And Jose would come and sit with me, and we would talk about the Lord all the time. And while we were sitting there talking that day, he said, Keith, whenever someone gives us a gift, we have to accept that gift, because if we don't, we're robbing that person of their blessing. I said, you're right. That's absolutely right. That's really cool stuff. So we visit for a little bit. I get done eating. I get in my car. I'm driving back to the office. Jason calls me. He said, hey, I just got to tell you, I can't make it today. Something came up. I've got to go do this, that, whatever. And we're going to meet tomorrow. He goes, I just want you to understand that I believe in you and you can do this. And I just put X amount of dollars in your bank account.
Wow.
So I sat there for a second, and he said, are you there? I said, yeah. He said, are you okay? I said, yeah. So Jason, let me tell you something. 30 minutes ago, if you would have told me that you would just put money in my bank account, I would have got mad, and I'd have probably quit because I had too much pride for somebody to help me like that. I said, but let me tell you what just happened.
Yeah. It was prepped almost,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a divine appointment, I guess. And so I told Jason about the Jose Romero story. And he goes, well, there you go. He said, meet me tomorrow and let's get you on system. I said, all right. So the next day I meet him at lunch. We write it out on thing. First and foremost, pack calls. He said, if you don't buy into pack calls, your people never will. And you can go in and get this information out of folks, but the people you're hiring can't do it. So you've got to do it and show them. Pack calls, get on script, get on system and all that. And so I started learning the script that day. Made a bunch of pack calls that day, went out the next day and closed a big county, closed a big, really cool story, as a big trucking company. And I drive by this trucking company, and of course everything is on paper. Mm-hmm. And I look over at that and I'm like, man, I ain't going in that business. That's not a booming business. And I drive on by and I drive down and I pull over and I pull my pack call out and I read it. 19 employees, has the employer's name and all that. And I was like, all right, dadgummit. So I turn around, pull in.
So you didn't want to do it.
I didn't want to do it.
You had to convince yourself to go back.
It didn't look like something that I wanted, a booming business.
I already know where this is going.
Yeah, so I go in, I knock on the door. I'm standing on the ground. He's got some stairs. I knock on the door, and he opens up the door and looks out. His name's Adam. Great guy. Still great friends with him to this day. He goes, hey, man, what's going on? I said, oh, not much. I said, so go into the system. I was getting on script at that point. Even just in a couple of days, I bought in, and I'm like, I'm doing this. I've got to do it. And so he has me come inside. He's got a couple deer heads. So we talk about deer hunting for a minute. He goes, now, what is it you told me you do? I said, man, I help businesses provide benefits to their employees. And, mainly life insurance is what we do that's different. It takes me about 10 or 15 minutes. And he goes, man, I've been wanting to do that for my guys. Have you got time to do it right now?
That never happens. Yeah. And it's the one you didn't want to go into, right?
Exactly. And I was like, well, you know what? I do have time, So I sit down with him. Signed him up, went back the next week, wrote about $15,000 every year. Every year we go in and write $5,000 to $8,000 with this guy. Just phenomenal person, great employees. It just grows every year. And so because of that pack call, had I not had that, I'd have never walked into that business. Yeah. And that was kind of a career turnaround. And I signed a big city and another big company right down the street that had 7 locations that I've got over $100,000 worth of business in right now, which is really, really cool. Yeah. On that. So the system, man, it turned me around.
It's so interesting because when we started this, talk about all your accolades and 6 years being in the top on the SEAL team, and you're constantly on stage at the annual convention, and you have all this success, and we kind of joke that you're Mr. Consistency. You're just you're just so consistent. But how much of that is just systems creating that consistency for you? It seems like that's.
Oh, yeah. 95% systems and the other 5% of discipline, of just executing the systems, Matter of fact, that same year, that 2015 in March, I'm ready to quit. I'm like, man, I just can't do it because it's just hurting my heart with the folks that I'm hiring couldn't do it. But at the end of the year, the last week of December, we went from 11th place to 10th place, and I got to go on stage at convention that year.
Wow.
On that. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
So, how now at this stage in your life, in your career, things are going really well for you. You've got a good business.
Yeah.
You're very successful. Yeah. How impactful is wanting to, make a change in other people's lives, I guess? What's your philosophy for developing people? I'm sure your past is a huge influence in wanting to help people through whatever they're going through. But, can you just talk to kind of just your leadership philosophy?
So my leadership philosophy, today, I made a post in my group me. I'm like, guys, start today thinking about what you want your Christmas to look like. Because if you start today, you're going to have the best Christmas you've ever had.
Yeah.
I said, I've been there where I couldn't buy my kids gifts, and I don't want to see any of you guys.
Couldn't buy food.
Couldn't buy food. Yeah. And I've been there, and I don't want to see anybody in that position, and if you guys will do what I've shown you and what we've trained you, and you'll do it, diligently, you're going to make a difference in your lives, your kids' lives. So, that's the thing about this. For me is the recruiting part, especially the personal recruiting and bringing people in and changing their lives. It's just phenomenal because of what it's done for me.
So that passion is driving
passion,
you.
That I'm so passionate about the recruiting aspect of it. Yes, I love protecting families. Yes, I love whenever we get, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I love how we take care of families once we get those claims. The claims, we take care of them really well, and I love that part of it. I don't like getting them, but I love how we take care of them, if that makes sense on that. But I love helping people that way. But that's my philosophy for leadership is just show up every day. You can't have 3 good days or 3 days that you show up and 2 days that you don't show up. You've got to show up 5 days a week, and just apply yourself each and every day. There's people out there that would love to have the opportunity that we have, and it's our job to get it in front of them. But then it's their job to execute, and to get up every day and have that discipline to work.
So would you say your purpose is to help these people that are maybe living, and sometimes, it's said, those quiet lives of desperation, or, they just can't figure out where to turn, and, maybe they're kind of lost, wandering around, and your purpose, your passion is to bring them in.
Yeah. Give them in, give them hope.
Yeah.
I want to be able to give them a hope, because if there's not any hope, whether in life or especially in work or in business, then there's not ever going to be any type of thriving at all. There's got to be some hope in there, and that's I love to bring them in and let them. I share my story with anybody that I can. Because I want them to know, hey, I didn't walk into this and just all of a sudden I was here. I didn't arrive.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, it's really overwhelming. I really have a hard time accepting the role that I have, the platform that God's given me. I have a hard time accepting that because I'm still just the dumb old country boy from Judsonia, Arkansas.
Yeah.
I'm still that 12-year-old kid that was begging God to bring his dad back to him.
Yeah.
So I have that, but also I embrace the platform that he's given me, and I'm going to do my best to be as disciplined as I can to share it, that.
Well, Keith, it is a phenomenal story, just what you've overcome, who you've made yourself into, who you've become now, and what you're able to do to give back. It's just, it's inspiring. And it's, I'm just very grateful that you'd be willing to come here and share it. And, I'm sure, make yourself a little vulnerable talking about, where you've been but I think it's just such a fantastic story.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate it. Like I said, I love to share my story. It's ripping bandages off every time I do it.
Yeah.
But I know it's for the good of others because for one, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair if there wasn't a purpose for it,
Right.
And, man, I'm so thankful for you, and you've become a good friend in this business.
That.
And I look up to you tremendously, and I've watched your leadership and stuff, and it's helped me tremendously. I want to say one thing that I don't know how well I thanked Steve, but on convention at awards night, this is going to be tough. But after the awards ceremony, Steve DeCharlo pulled me aside, and he said, I just want you to know that you're a tremendous inspiration to this entire company. And I thank you for sharing everything that you share.
Absolutely.
And man, that meant so much to me for him to pull me aside and say that. And I don't know, I was just kind of awestruck when he said it, and I don't know how much I thanked him, but, Steve, I want to personally thank you right now for, for speaking life into me with that. That's what we need each and every day. We need people that are going to speak life into us. Sometimes that life is a correction on how we're not on system.
Right. Look what it's done for you.
Yeah, that's what Jesus did to me. And then other times it's just lifting you up and helping you accept your role.
Just edifying where you're at. And
exactly.
I know we're getting towards the end here, but I just want to ask this, how impactful or important do you think is having this mindset when there's something challenging that happens to you, or there's something bad, or you find yourself in a really difficult position, a dark place? I think sometimes people have a few different ways they can view it, that, oh, this just, woe is me, this has happened to me.
Yeah.
And it's totally understandable, and I think it's part of it. Everyone, feels, and I'm sure you felt that as you were going through these things as well. But then there comes a time of, how can I take this and make it into something good? And how can I take this obstacle and do something with it?
Right. I think probably everybody in the very beginning, whenever something bad has happened or whatever, they will have that woe is me outlook. But here's the thing. We're allowed to have that for a very short period of time. It's okay for a little bit, but it can't be your outlook on life for the rest of your life on that. You can't have that, woe is me. You've got to battle back. There's always a brighter side to it. There's always a way up and out. And if you can't do it on your own, reach out and reach up to somebody else, and reach out from help from anybody that you can, a mentor, a friend, a pastor, whatever. But you've got to have that mentality that no matter what happens, I can get myself out of this, with help, if needed, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get out of it. You know, and we can't rest on our alls. We have to. Oh man, all this, all that. We got to rest on our O's. Oh wow, look at this. We've got to look for our O's and not rest on our alls. It's kind of something I say every now and then. Kind of sounds silly, but it makes sense.
That's an Arkansas expression right there.
Arkansas, I want to be about oh wow,
right?
Not oh shucks. I'm oh wow. Oh wow, look at this.
Well, it's being a victor, not a victim.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is hard.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes it is. Yeah.
Well, again, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing the story.
I appreciate you inviting me, man. It's been really fun. I emotional,
Of course.
But it's awesome.
Yeah, when we had conversations leading up to this as well, it was it's a process. So I understand. Well, Keith, as you may know, we have a tradition at the Level Up Life. So we're kind of lighten the mood here a little bit, right? Where everyone who comes on the Level Up Lifestyle is going to receive a bobblehead of yourself. And then, eventually as the seasons go by, we'll have all the bobbleheads of the past guests on here, and you get to display this in your office, kind of as a token. So I want to present you first with the Keith Bennett Level Up Lifestyle bobblehead. This is you, Keith.
Oh, wow. I didn't know my cheeks were so fat.
Well, it's just the balance the head is all that is.
That's awesome.
And you're holding the world, it looks like, and you've got the globe. So just kind of close on this. If you can go back in time, talking to your bobblehead self here. I don't know what stage in your life you'd want to talk to, if it's the 12-year-old or if it's the, right when you're, in that moment in the shower, or, whatever stage in your life, what would you tell yourself back then with what you know today?
Oh my gosh. Going back to when I was 12 is that, just, have faith, there's, your dad's going to be okay. And then as I was fighting through my addiction, is to stop fighting, and give up and give in and give it to the Lord sooner. And then another thing is just remind myself to do everything I can to be inspirational. no matter what it is, I want to, whether it's sharing my story or sharing my successes, I want to be inspirational, and I would remind myself to do everything you could every day to be inspirational. I've got 6 grandkids, and another one on the way. I'm about to have 6 boys and a granddaughter.
Congratulations!
Yeah, thanks. I'm having another boy in January, and I want to be inspirational for them, and I would want to remind myself back then that, hey, no matter what, you have got to inspire people.
Absolutely. Great. Well, Keith, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And we appreciate you being here.
I appreciate it, man. God bless you, buddy.
All right. Thanks. You too.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope this episode has inspired you on your path to success. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. See you soon on the Level Up Lifestyle Podcast.